Well, hello. It's another episode of the Machine of Death. Uh, okay.
Despair. They died anyway. Of course they did. That's what those little cards are good for. The security guards here have a league table of the most impressive death predictions reported in the UK press. The cold list, they call it. They got me to phone the doctor whose machine predicted that an 83-year-old bedridden Cardiff woman would die of stunt plane crash. I used to feel sick looking at the list because, for a moment, a bit inside me would laugh and wonder at the improbabilities written there, and then the moment would pass and I would begin to imagine the Cessna tumbling from the sky, falling down, down, down onto a slate roof under which an old lady was sleeping. The top of the list at the moment is solar flare. I have no idea how that one will turn out. The first one came in 21 hours ago, just as I'd started my shift. In the early morning, the emergency waiting room was intolerably bright, and I squinted out of the windows, clean enough at midday, but blindingly dirty against the low sun. The call that the ambulance was coming in had been taken by a guy who'd just gone off shift, and I didn't really know what to expect. In theory, there's supposed to be some kind of chain of responsibility to keep us all prepared, but in practice, doctors have long shifts and want to go home more than they want to tell you that a middle-aged man is coming in suffering from severe pain and passing blood in his urine. This is the procedure now. A vehicle comes into the bay, paramedics pull a body out on an unfolding trolley, and a nurse meets them and asks them for the card. Sometimes she smiles, and you know that this one might well walk out of the hospital. Sometimes she gets a stony look on her face, and you know that her eyes have flicked across to the patient to see who's going to die. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes she frowns, as Nurse Keeling did with the first one. We doctors don't like to look at the cards. Once upon a time, all doctors sounded like Hawkeye Pierce. Death was our enemy, and if you can't point to your enemy, your crusade is noble. You're fighting against the odds, snatching a few more years, months, weeks of life for your patients, defeating your endless foe. But, of course, we don't fight that fight anymore. We fight a stiff piece of card, and we know that ultimately we're going to lose. What could be more ignoramus than to be defeated by a few grams of wood pulp? I examined the patient, late 40s according to the driving license that the paramedics had found, but looking like he might be in his 30s. I had seen people like him at the speed dating evening the previous Friday. Divorcees taking their shot while they still had time, boring and desperate. He could so easily have been there, and as I directed him to be moved into the nearby observation room, I suddenly felt sorry for them. They were alive, and they deserved their chance at a little happiness. "Marianne," Nurse Keeling said by my elbow. The other doctors don't like to be called by their first name, but I let the nurses do it because it endears me to them, and they don't complain as much when I land them with paperwork that I should really be doing myself, which I do shamelessly. "What's the verdict?" I asked her. She held out the card to me, and I know that I recoiled, because I haven't touched a card other than my own in 5 years. "You'd better look for yourself." I stared at the card without reaching for it, and Nurse Keeling flipped it up so that I could see. Tests. Shit. I ran back to the doors that lead to the ambulance parking area. The two paramedics that had brought in my patient were trying to maneuver out past another ambulance, and as I cleared the doors, the driver spotted me and leaned on his horn in an effort to scare the other vehicle out of the way. I was too fast for them, though, ducking around the accidental roadblock and intercepting one ambulance as it swerved around the back of the other. They screeched to a halt a few feet in front of me, and I strode over and pulled open the door. "Before you ask, we didn't do any tests," the paramedic in the passenger seat cried. The driver, who looked afraid for his life, and in truth I myself felt like pulling him out of his seat and beating him, cringed away from me and nodded. "You'd better not have," I snarled and slammed the door shut. We could barely do anything without the tests, of course. For 2 hours after he was brought in, we watched my patient get weaker and weaker. He passed blood in his urine, but we were too scared to take that even for analysis. This is what the machines have done to us. They've left us second-guessing reality. We gave him an analgesic to keep him as comfortable as possible, but we all knew that we were not dealing with something that would pass if we treated the obvious symptoms. Something was wrong with him. Injury, possibly. More likely a viral or bacterial infection. Something that would kill him. But if we tried to discover what was wrong, and he died, he would be outside the NHS rule, Clause 14 of the revised Patients' Charter. Medical staff or hospital trust employees will take no action likely to hasten or lead to a predicted death. Realistically, Nurse Keeling argued, there's no way that testing his blood and urine can kill him, surely. "You know what those fucking machines are like," Dr. Jameson said, shaking his head. "You could trip while carrying the test results back in and stab the poor bastard with a needle." He leaned down and reached for the sheet covering our patient. "What are you doing?" I asked sharply. "Nothing." "It doesn't look like nothing," I told him. "I'm taking a look, all right. A look, not a fucking test, a look." I stepped back and he peered under the sheet at the patient's back. After a few seconds, he stood up again. "Kidneys rather than bladder, definitely." "So it's going to kill him," I said. "Yes," he said, in a quiet, flat voice. The second and third ones came in almost together, although I didn't know about the second one until much later. I found out about the third one from Dr. France, who saw me standing at the vending machine in the lobby. I was deciding whether to have a crunchy or a packet of knickknacks, and had been trapped in that decision-making process for 3 minutes. Perhaps I wanted to make a difference to something, however trivial. "Hello, Marianne," he said. "Are you doing anything tomorrow night?" "Going out with my boyfriend," I lied. I don't have a boyfriend. I occasionally fuck one of our security guards in the supply closet, an ex-policeman who was fired because his card read "shot." The North Hampshire Police Force have one of the lowest reported incidents of gun crime in the UK, and it would have been a terrible public relations blow to have a policeman shot on duty. I like him because he keeps himself in shape and because he has an ex-wife and a child who take up all the emotional energy that he would otherwise spend developing feelings for me. Dr. France flinched. Perhaps he knows, I thought. "Anyway," he said, plastering on a smile, "I've got something a bit interesting. Thought you might enjoy wrestling with a little problem. We've got a young woman in with blood in her urine, probably simply urinary tract infection." An ice sheet spread out from my spine. "Thing is, her card says..." "Tests," I interrupted him. He looked at me quizzically. "How did you know?" Patient 2 was in a room at the other end of the ward, being treated by one of the junior doctors. Patients 4 and 5 were found by calling the emergency admissions at Kettering, and patient 6, a thin, middle-aged woman in old clothes, came in a few hours later. I could see instantly that she could understand the way things were headed, because she was arguing strenuously in Italian with her husband and in somewhat less eloquent English with the 2 grown-up daughters that accompanied them. She wanted to go home, and she must have understood what we did, that her devoted family's wish to help might be the death of her. We gave her painkillers, and I talked to them, individually and as a group, but for bad timing, I think she would have persuaded them to let her go home. But about a quarter of an hour after they arrived, I noticed that she was beginning to fade somewhat, and 5 minutes later she fell unconscious. At that point, we had to give her the same care we were giving the others, and we moved all 4 of the local patients into the same ward. Doctors France and Jameson argued endlessly with me over the treatments we could give, but all 4 of our arguments came to nothing. Without knowing the cause of the distress, any actions we took were more likely to be harmful than helpful, and more likely still to have no effect at all other than to waste time. I got desperate and handed the details of the patients over to Joe, my occasional tryst, strictly against hospital policy, because security staff do not generally need access to confidential medical records or indeed any kind of patient information. I thought he might be able to shed some light on the possible connection between the unfortunate 4 patients at our hospital, and if he had found one, I might have been able to persuade our equivalent numbers at Ketterling to hand over the equivalent information about their unfortunates. Despite a bit of help from some old friends of his at a local police station, it was all dead ends. The 6 people lived near each other, but not near enough to form a cluster for the purposes of determining some environmental cause. There were no common work links and no social connection. There was a moment of excited hope when he discovered that the serial numbers on the back of 2 of the cards showed identical mistakes in the printing, but neither of the other 2 cards showed any similar signs. So, 2 of the patients had been diagnosed by the same machine, probably at roughly the same time, but that was the only connection we could find. Almost certainly a coincidence, he told me sadly. I mean, I'll keep looking if you like, but don't rely on me to turn up anything useful anytime soon. Fine, I said, and left him to it. I was grateful to him for trying, for giving me that moment of hope that we might find some way to cheat the machines, if only for today, but I couldn't show it. That wasn't the way it worked between us. We got the 2 patients from Ketterling transferred over by ambulance. It was easy. No one wanted responsibility for them. Even with all 6 of the sufferers together, we could find out no extra information. It was Dr. France who finally said it. "What if we just start?" he said quietly. "We can't. We have to do something. What we can't do is just let them die." He shot me a sullen look. "I can't, anyway." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," he shook his head. "Look, I'm tired. I know it's not good, but we have to start some kind of tests. They're not going to last much longer." "Just one, then," Jameson interjected. "What?" "You know what those damn machines are like. Tests could mean a completely different thing for everyone here. Maybe only one of them are at risk from tests we might do. God, we do tests all the time, and people die from them, even people without cards. If we start," I spoke slowly and calmly, "we know what will happen." The 3 of us stood silent, watching the 6 patients and listening to the muted sounds of bustle and activities coming from the corridor outside the ward. A strange sensation came over me, as though the world were receding, as though I were looking at it through a long tunnel. My hands were hard to move, as though I had slept in the cold, my muscles stiff and unresponsive. With an effort, I walked to the foot of patient 1 and read out the details at the top of his card. Brian Felton, 47. I turned it sideways. In the margins of the chart, Nurse Keeling had written in pencil, "Wife and 2 children." I read aloud. Replacing the chart, I moved to the next bed. Simon Lines, 23. Girlfriend brought him in. "Janice Gregg," said France, without looking at the chart. "She's 31, unmarried, a school teacher." He turned to the 4th bed, the old woman transferred from Kettering. "Maud Carver, 63. You'd guess from the name, wouldn't you? Who calls anyone Maud anymore?" He looked down at the chart again. "Widowed." Dr. Jameson picked up the 5th and 6th charts, one in each hand. From the left, Louise Burden, 28, 1 kid. From the right, Amelia Straboli, 51, married, 2 daughters, 1 son, 1 grandson. He put the charts back on their hooks, and we stood back and looked at the 6 bodies laid out before us. "Are we really considering this?" Jameson asked. "No, we can't consider it," I said. The others looked at me. "We have to just do it. It can't be Brian or France pointed to the fifth one. Louise, Jameson supplied, or Amelia. No one with children. Janice is young, France said. Simon, too. They looked at me. So we're going to kill Maud because she's the oldest, I asked. She hasn't got any, France began, but Jameson interrupted him. We're not going to kill her at all. We're going to test her. And the tests are going to kill her, I nodded. Have the balls to admit it. He sighed, shrugged, and walked over to pick up the chart. It says here she had a stroke 2 years ago. So? Look, she made it 2 years. Who's to say she won't make it another 30? Plus, said France carefully, that's exactly the kind of thing that makes me nervous. Given her stroke, I'd be a bit careful what tests I did on her anyway. We walked over and took the chart away from Jameson, scanned it, then put it back on the hook. He turned back to the third patient. I could tell he was thinking something that he didn't like, and I realized what it was going to be. She was his patient, of course, and he'd been charged with making her well again. Perhaps we should consider Janice. Jameson picked up the school teacher's chart. She's healthy, France continued. Least likely to have any trouble with the tests, I'd say. He smiled. Hey, I've just thought of something. She's a teacher, right? Perhaps the stress of grading is what's going to get her. It could be nothing to do with this at all. Of all of them, she's the most likely to survive, right? He nodded at Jameson and me, trying to convince himself by convincing us. I ignored his pleading and pointed to my own patient. Why save Felton? I asked. He has kids. He's a shit, I spat. He beats them. He screws around, and he's given his wife the clap. Jesus, Marianne. France slapped my hand down. He might be able to hear you. That's not funny. I saw Jameson's eyes flick down to my balled fists. No, wait. He pulled France back by the shoulder. France protested. I see what she means, Jameson said, staring past France directly at me. France had believed he was talking to him, of course. We can't make this decision. We can't just do this based on our prejudices. That's how the cards beat us. They use us against ourselves. He was wrong, of course, but we had to tell France something to make him listen to sense. There's only one thing to do, I told them. I found the box in the waiting room. There's a little pile of books and toys to keep kids occupied while we talked to the parents. Most of it was for the smaller children, but there was a wooden box of classic games that had a backgammon board. I don't suppose it had ever been used. Half of the white counters were missing, but I found most of the red ones in one of the dice, which I scooped up into my pocket and carried back to our ward. We make up something to tell the families, of course, I told France and Jameson, then rolled the die on top of the defibrillator chart. I saw two come face up for a moment, 2 black sockets and a white face. Then it was passed and the cube came to a rest. 5, said France. Louise, Jameson corrected him. They died anyway. Of course they did. That's what those little cards are good for. The first round of tests showed nothing, so we took more blood from Louise. That's when she began to bleed under her skin around where we'd put the needle in. Pretty soon she was convulsing, and then her vitals began to deteriorate and her heart stopped. While the tests were coming back, Maud stopped breathing. We revived her, but her brain had been without oxygen for too long. When she stopped breathing again, we couldn't bring her back. Nurse Keeling brought the test results back. Some viral activity, but sadly not characteristic enough for us to work out what we were dealing with. The die rolled 5 again, then 2. So we took blood from Simon. He survived, but we got the same inconclusive results, during which time Brian and Amelia had both gone. We gave the young man antivirals, but his condition deteriorated faster, and he died 2 hours after Amelia. Finally, we watched Janice Gregg's heart rate get slower and slower until finally she too left us. We'd been watching the 6 of them for close to a day, on and off. France and Jameson looked like corpses themselves, gray-faced and without a hint of emotion. It had drained everything from them, not just the deaths, but what those cards had forced us to do. I left them to it, slipping off quietly to find Joe. The causes of death were hemorrhagic fever with renal failure, or so the pathologist determined. I didn't feel like anyone was to blame. Who could have suspected a hantavirus outbreak in the Midlands? No other cases were reported, and the investigators were unable to trace any more connections than we had. I have Brian's card in my wallet. I kept it next to mine because that night its predictions came a little bit closer. I take Brian's out when I'm alone, and I stare at the word. I'm still unable to understand what it meant. Was it the tests, I wonder, or the lack of tests? Did the word mean the same thing for all of those 6? Did it mean hospital tests? Exams? What? The thoughts run through me like water, ever changing, but there is one I come back to. Who was being tested? Story by K.M. Lawrence.
That is so creepy. Whew. Anyway.